After HTML, CSS is the second most important language for building websites. Let's take a look at what it is and how it's used. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, but that name is pretty vague and doesn't really tell us much about it. Let's start trying to make sense of it by talking about how it's different from HTML. HTML is a markup language. Its job is to tell us what something is. Think about it like someone making a suit of clothes. First, you have to identify what to make, such as a jacket, pants, or a vest. This is basically what HTML does. It identifies content. CSS, on the other hand, is a style language. It sets the style or look of the content in the HTML. Again, if we were making clothes, we could decide on aspects like the color of the fabric, the amount of room in the fit, and the shape of the cut. This is basically what CSS does. It dictates how everything on a web page should look. If you build a web page with HTML only and don't include any CSS of your own, the browser applies its own set of generic default styles to the content. The default styles are essentially the browser's built-in CSS. These defaults are very minimal, so most websites write their own CSS styles to add identity, usability, and personality to their pages. Now, let's get specific and look at a few of the things CSS can help us achieve on a page. With CSS, we can set colors, align text, adjust sizes, and much, much more. Basically, anything that makes a website look unique and interesting is achieved with CSS. So you may be wondering at this point, why make CSS a separate thing? Why not just give HTML the ability to set styles? This all comes down to the idea of the separation of concerns. The most important reason to keep the two separate is that it means your styles are reusable across an entire website. You can write a single CSS declaration to style each element on the website instead of needing to rewrite the styles for the element every time you add a new page. Because of this, it is much easier to change styles. If you want to change the color of the paragraphs, you only do it once in the CSS instead of having to go into every page on the site and update the paragraphs individually. As designers, it is helpful for us to think of CSS as a website style guide. Now that we understand what CSS is, let's get specific and look at the syntax, or rules for how it is written. To write the most basic unit of CSS, we first need a selector, which identifies the part of the HTML we want to give a particular style. Selectors are followed by a set of curly braces between which the styles are applied. Then we need a property, which is what aspect of the visual presentation we want to adjust for this particular selector. A property is followed by a colon. Finally, we apply a value to that property to tell it exactly how we want it to look or behave. Every value is always followed by a semicolon. A property and value pair is called a declaration. Let's go back to our metaphor of a website as a suit of clothes. First, we would need to identify the particular item of clothes we were working on using a selector. Then we'd set a value for each particular property, such as what color to make them, or what cut to use, or whether to include pleats. With CSS, we can select HTML by simply using the element name, such as H1 or P. We can also get more specific by referencing classes or attributes. CSS can also use more sophisticated combination selectors for multiples, parent-child relationships, siblings, and more. Once the selector has been written, every property and value pair that goes inside the curly brackets is applied to whatever HTML element matches the selector. The selector, brackets, and list of properties together are called a declaration block. You can put as many property or value pairs inside a declaration block as you want, and they're all applied to elements that match the selector. So what happens if conflicting values are applied to the same property for the same selector? If all factors are equal, the declaration that comes last is the winner. Just like with written English, the browser reads CSS from top to bottom, and whatever it reads last is the one it sticks with. Another important thing to know is that most CSS properties are inherited, or passed down to children of a selected element. This is the cascade in the name cascading style sheets. For example, if we set the text alignment of the main element to be centered, a heading inside that main will also be centered because the style cascades down to it. So that's your introduction to CSS. In this video, we've discussed the difference between CSS and HTML, the concept of a browser's default styles, what CSS does, the idea of the separation of concerns between content and styles, basic CSS syntax, how to write selectors, declaration blocks, override CSS rules, and how styles cascade to children of a selected element using inheritance. With these basic concepts, you can style websites to be unique, creative, and usable.